So let's introduce you to some of my friends. Come on, sweetie. Isn't she beautiful? Now this is a Harris hawk. Her name is Belle. Now this is not this kind of Belle. It's B-E-L-L-E. Now, there's my pretty girl. And that's basically a southern Belle. She came out of a captive breeding program just north of New Orleans in Louisiana. So she's not from the wild, she's from a captive breeding program. And because of that, really, cute little sweet young ladies are called Southern Belles. And so she's my little Southern Belle. Now the Harris hawk is a really good example of a hawk. Hawks and falcons are very, very different. And so let me kind of show you what the differences are. First thing you'll notice is look at those feet. That's what she kills with. Those massively thick, powerful feet, large talons. Now, she hunts primarily things on the ground, so she hunts a lot of rabbits and squirrels and gophers and those kinds of things. So she needs those big, powerful feet to hang onto and subdue and kill the animals that she's hunting. Now, because she hunts on the ground, she has longer legs. So her legs are fairly long, which you can see right here, because she has to catch things in the brush. So she has to reach through the bushes and through branches and trees to grab whatever it is that she's hunting. So she has longer legs. She has rounded wings, big, pretty rounded wings. Now she's primarily a sprint bird, which basically means a rabbit takes off running, and she has to catch that rabbit in the first, 50 to 100 yards, and the rabbit will outdistance her. So they're very quick, but only for short distances. And look at the size of this tail. This is her rudder. That's what she steers with. It makes her very maneuverable. And look how much this tail moves. You can kind of wind her up in order to get her started. Yes, I'm playing with your tail, sweetie. And so big tails, rounded wings, longer legs, more powerful feet. That's a hawk. And they are a very, very efficient hunter. We'll show you a falcon a little bit later, and you can kind of see the differences between the two. Now, many, many years ago, back in California, I grew up in a small town. I grew up in a small agricultural community. I grew up in the middle of an orange grove. And everybody in town knew everybody. It was a really nice place to live and to be a kid. This was a place where you could basically call your neighbor up on the phone and says, hey, can I borrow your pickup truck? And your neighbor would say, sure. The keys are on the floor. Guys, remember those days? When you trusted everybody, you just used to leave the keys to your car on the floor of your car, but you can't do that anymore. Well, that's the kind of place that I grew up in. And I had this little Toyota car, the back seat would fold down, and the hawk would sit on the back seat of the car. So that's how we transferred back and forth out to the fields. Well, I had a female Harris hawk like this one, and she had a bit of a sad story. She'd been stolen from her nest by some teenage boys. Now, a hawk raised by man has no fear of man. We call that imprint. And a hawk raised by man with no fear of man can be incredibly dangerous. A hawk raised by man with no fear of man, if it gets mad at you for any reason, they will hurt you. No respect. So we have this big female Harris hawk, strolled through the nest, imprinted, raised inappropriately. She was dangerous. She was horribly abused. She ended up with a broken leg. That's when she came to me, because I'm the guy that rescues the critters, and I've been rescuing these guys for over 50 years. Well, I could fix her broken leg, but I could not fix the emotional scars that she carried with her for the rest of her life. That hawk was so emotionally disturbed, its favorite thing to hunt was cows. We would go out on the desert. If there was a cow within a mile, she had to go beat up a cow. She'd attack horses. She'd attack joggers. She attacked a farmer on his tractor. Okay, she had issues. Needless to say, we couldn't put her back in the wild. She'd hurt people. So she stayed with me for the rest of her life as one of my wildlife ambassadors and one of my falconry birds, and she and I got along wonderfully together, and she was a good friend. Well, back in my hometown, I took my hawk out. We went out and let her go chase rabbits for a little while. On our way back into town, I stopped at the local gas station to buy something to drink. So I walked in the store to buy a soda pop. As I came walking out of the store, I heard screaming. And I saw a guy bailing out of my car. So I'm running across the parking lot. I got to my car. My hawk is on the ground next to the car. So I pick up my hawk and put her back on her perch in the back seat of the car. And I noticed that my keys had been picked up off the floor and put in the ignition. He tried to steal my car. Now, I don't know if he saw the hawk, didn't see the hawk, saw the hawk and thought it was stuffed, have no idea what was going through his mind. But can you imagine you jump into a strange car, grab the keys off the floor, put them in the ignition, and having 8 razor-sharp talons puncturing the back of your neck, wings beating, and the most awful growl you've ever heard. There were quarter-sized drops of blood going down the street. I know he needed stitches. Going to assume that's the last car he ever tried to steal. My hawk got the nickname my feathered Doberman Pinscher. Well, like I said, I've been rescuing these guys for over 50 years. My sweet wife Susan, last winter we celebrated our 41st wedding anniversary. In February it'll be a 42nd. Can you imagine anybody's put up with me for 42 years? She's an amazing young lady. Our very first date, I took her hunting with that hawk. I'm a romantic kind of a guy. So we get out to the field. I get the hawk out of the car, onto my glove, and then at that time my girlfriend, but now my wife, approached.
Hello?
My hawk turned around and faced her and growled violently at her.
Yes.
Then my hawk turned back around facing me, lifted its tail, and pooped on her. That was our first date. She married me anyway. It's her fault. Well, my wife and I have written a book. If you like animal stories, this is 40 years of wildlife rescue stories and the wisdom of grandparents. And the eagle on the front cover here, this eagle's name is Scout, and you'll get to meet him in just a few minutes. And my eagle has autographed my book. My wife and I have autographed it, but so has my eagle. That's my eagle's footprint. So it's the only book in the world autographed by a wild eagle. And the profits from the sale of our book go to our wildlife rescue center to help us feed the animals. So the money goes to a good cause. In the process of writing our book, I told my sweet wife Susan, I says, we need to tell the story of my old Harris hawk, Sierra, and put that in the book. And she says, well, if you're going to tell everybody about our first date, you have to tell everybody about the rest of our first date. And I says, no, the story's funnier where I end the story where you get pooped on. And she says, no, you have to tell everybody about the rest of our first date. And I says, well, Susan, if you want to tell everybody about the rest of our first date, you have to write the story. So she did. And so if you want to learn about the rest of our first date, you got to buy a book. I know, terrible thing to do. Hot questions that I can answer for anyone. Hot questions?
Is there a significance to the tail becoming white at the bottom?
Well, that's just the way they're made. They actually, as a juvenile, the tail is banded kind of gray and black. But as an adult, they get a white tip and a white band around the butt as well. And their feathers go black and the shoulders go more red. And so this is just their adult plumage.
How old is she?
She's a little more than a year and a half.
And fully grown.
Full grown. They're full grown at 9 weeks.
Wow.
From the time they hatch to as big as they'll ever get and flying, they're 9 weeks old.
So does she have all of her adult plumage now, or just part of it?
She has almost all of her adult plumage. If you look very carefully when I spread her wings, you'll see there's a couple of wing feathers that are barred. She still has a couple of her juvenile feathers, and she's got one tail feather down here that's growing in. That's not completely in. So she doesn't have all of her adult color yet, but vast majority of it's in.
Does the shape of the beak have anything to do with being born in captivity or being wild versus like how much of it curves versus being?
Well, all birds of prey have a hooked beak. That's just normal. That's the way they are. The beak is designed to rip chunks of flesh.
Yeah.
And so that's what it's for. Now, in captivity, we do have to kind of coat them a little bit, just kind of file them down to keep them at their natural shape. Because in captivity, they don't rub their beaks on rocks and stuff like they do in the wild to keep them filed down. And so there's a little bit of maintenance you have to do to keep them looking proper. Are there hawk questions before we put the little hawk up?
The mask you use, I understand that keeping like a dark space for birds makes them more comfortable in transport. Is that what that's for?
Yeah, this is called a hood. And this is her stress protection. Just like when you see horses in the city, they have blinders on so that all that peripheral movement doesn't drive them nuts. Well, a bird of prey's eyesight's extremely good. And a lot of movement drives them crazy. So when you're transporting them, or if there's just too much activity going on, the bird's getting stressed, I can put the hood over her eyes, just like that. I know. And now she can relax and say, oh, thank goodness I don't have to look at all these ugly people anymore. So this is her stress protection, yes.
Other than a red tail, how are they different from a red-tailed hawk?
How are they different from a red-tailed hawk? A red-tailed hawk's about equal size. A red-tailed hawk, their toes are a little bit shorter. These have longer toes. The red-tailed hawk, the tail's a little bit smaller, and the red-tailed hawk is they got a little bit longer wings, but they are rounded, just like every other hawk is.
Same kind of mannerisms and hunting.
The red-tailed hawk has a really, really good personality for a wild bird of prey, and this is why for most falconers, that's the first bird you start working with is a red-tailed, because they're large and they're durable, and they've got a good, stable disposition. You can get a bird of equal size, built very similar to this, called a goshawk, and if you are not highly skilled, you're going to have a nightmare on your hands. The bird is just too high strung and too difficult to deal with without a lot of experience. You know, it's kind of like, you know, when you have a teenage boy, you get a teenage boy some slow old clunker car as the first car. You don't buy them a Ferrari to start with, because if you buy them a Ferrari to start with, they're going to kill themselves. Does that make sense? Same with these guys. You try to get a bird that's good and hardy and durable and stable to be a first animal for falconry.
What are the bells for?
The bells are when she's out hunting. You know, basically she sits on my glove and we go out through the desert and I'm hitting bushes, watching rabbits. She takes off chasing a rabbit. You know, the sagebrush out where we fly is oftentimes over my head. And she flies off that way. I lose sight of her. I just walk in the direction that she has gone and listen under the bushes for that sound. And that cues me into her location. Now we do have a transmitter, a GPS transmitter. In fact, you can see a little clip on her tail right there. We have a little GPS transmitter we do put on her, so if she does get a long ways off and I'm completely disoriented and I can't find her at all, then I can use the GPS to track her down. But even when we track her down, the GPS is good for within about 6 to 10 feet. And so the bell is even more useful then, because you it's around here someplace and you listen for the bell to help you locate them. Yes, sir?
Is that a local, we see these birds here?
No, these birds are actually southern Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. And so they don't come quite this far now. Any questions before we bring up the falcon, guys? No more questions for Belle?
I'll just say over where I live in Washington, I see a red-tailed hawk a couple times a day.
Oh, absolutely.
They're up on the telephone poles, and even my kids at school, they're the red hawks, is what they named them.
Yep. Yeah, the red-tailed hawk is the most common large hawk in North America. And we do have a really good population here in Utah. Here's my picture. Pretty lady. Come on, sweetie. Yes, you were sleeping. Come on. Isn't she beautiful? This is the Peregrine falcon. This is the endangered species you've heard so much about. The Peregrine falcon is a classic falcon. And this particular falcon, it was believed in the late 1960s, there was only about 4 dozen pairs of these left in North America. Falconers such as myself, we brought all of our peregrines together, created a breeding project called the Peregrine Fund. We have raised tens of thousands of these and returned them back to the wild. The Peregrine falcon is the first animal to be removed from the endangered species list. And so they're doing very, very well. Really within 100 miles of where you're sitting, guys, I've got over 100 pairs of peregrines right here. As I see them flying over St. George all the time. Now again, the falcon and the hawk are very, very different. Let me show you the difference. Look at the feet of the falcon. Even though the toes are long, but they're very thin. And they're softer, and they're not nearly as powerful. The talons are razor sharp, but again, not nearly the strength. Look how short the legs are on the falcon. The falcon hunts other birds. They hunt in the sky. And so they're not reaching through bushes and stuff to catch their quarry, so the legs are much shorter. Also, what you're looking at here, guys, is the fastest animal that's ever lived on this planet. The large falcon, like the peregrine, the prairie, the deer, the sacred, the larger falcons that we have here around the world, fastest animals ever lived on the planet. These birds, a terminal velocity dive on a falcon like this is 200 miles an hour. Nothing's ever gone faster. as far as an animal is concerned. And so they're built for high speed. Now at 200 miles an hour, hitting a duck, a pheasant, or a pigeon, if you have long, thin legs, your legs will break. With the short, thick legs, they can withstand those kinds of impacts. Now the Falcon has pointy wings. Show you pretty wings. Pretty wings, pretty pointy wings, instead of rounded wings, because they're a much more high-speed bird. It's got a much, much smaller tail. Oh yes, a much smaller tail. They don't need nearly as big a tail because of the speeds they're traveling. They had a really large tail. It would be hard to maneuver because you flip them upside down. So they're just absolutely built for it. Now here's a couple of key things that you look for if you want to know if it's a falcon or a hawk. Look at the eyes. All hawks have either brown eyes, blue eyes, gray eyes, red eyes, yellow eyes, orange eyes. All falcons have black eyes. Period. All falcons with black eyes. So if you see a bird of prey with black eyes, it's a falcon. Any other color, it's a hawk. Falcons have a stripe that comes right down below the eye. Now the peregrine falcon, the stripe is very, very bold, and the black actually ends up covering the whole head. Some falcons, the stripe is very faint, it's hard to see, but they all have a stripe, the hawks do not. All falcons have a bone in the center of the nose, and you guys can see that a little bit, that bone in the nose. That brings up the air when they're flying at high speed, so they don't suffocate in that 200 mile an hour dive. So all falcons are built the same. Now, this little gal is a bit of a sad story with her. Now she, again, out of a captive breeding program, she's not out of the wild. She's out of a breeding project. And the person that raised her noticed something very early in her life. When mom and dad would bring food to the nest in the breeding chamber, the other baby falcons would run up to mom and scream and fight and look for food. This one would scream and fight, but it would face the wall. She's almost blind. And when she got out of the nest, she couldn't find her way back to the perch, to the nesting perch. She only can see about 3 feet. So she's very, very, very nearsighted. And the breeder that had her basically called me on the phone late last winter and says, I've got this falcon, came out to my breeding project that year, and she's nearly blind. We can't put her in the wild. We can't use her for falconry, and we're just going to have to euthanize her. Says, can you use another falcon for your educational programs? And I says, well, I've already got 2 other falcons. I don't need a third. And he says, well, you were my last hope. I guess we're just going to have to euthanize her. And I says, well, bring her over. So he brought her over, and she's really quite beautiful. She looks perfectly healthy, and there's nothing that bothers me more.
Levon, you have a call on 7110. Levon, you have a call on 7110.
There's nothing that bothers me more than when you go to a program like this and you see a bird of prey at the program, it's got one eye and a mangled wing and a broken leg and those kinds of things. You know, when I go to the schools and show off these birds, I want people to look at this bird and say, oh my God, she's beautiful, instead of saying, oh my God, poor thing. Does that make sense, guys? And so I don't like taking birds that have obvious disabilities. But her blindness isn't an issue. You know, she can see blurry stuff that she doesn't see very well.
Her eyes are big.
Well, the falcon's eyes are big. That's quite normal. They are quite big. Now, we had a name the falcon contest, and the name that was chosen was Helen. If you were smiling, you understand. Helen Keller was deaf and blind, but was an amazing ambassador for the disabled. And so her name is Helen. She's almost blind, but she's an amazing ambassador for wildlife. So that's what she got her name Helen for. And she has been just really wonderful to take around and educate people about these beautiful, beautiful animals. Now, the peregrine falcon has saved our lives, all of us. We owe our lives to this bird. And the reason we owe our lives to this bird is during the late 1960s, again, they thought there was only about 4 dozen pairs left. The peregrine population crashed. All of a sudden, all of the nests that we knew about were not being successful. Something was going wrong and going wrong fast. Now, I grew up in the middle of an orange grove. When I was a kid, we used to wander through the orange groves, and they'd drive through the orange groves with the spray trucks, sprayed DDT to kill insects in the trees. And us kids used to come out of the orange grove just covered in DDT. That might explain a few things. You know, DDT was the safest pesticide in the world. Everybody knew that. It was completely harmless. But maybe it wasn't. I remember them spraying DDT over us kids at the community swimming pool for mosquito bait. You know, it was safe. Well, what we discovered, and the Peregrine Falcon taught us this, is DDT at much higher concentrations is detrimental. And what was happening is the DDT, you know, we were spraying the insects, the small birds eat the insects, they eat the small birds. The higher up the food chain, the more concentrated the DDT. They're at the top of the food chain, we're at the top of the food chain, what affects them affects us. And so basically what we discovered is the higher concentrations of DDT, they couldn't assimilate the calcium, and the eggs they were laying were too thin and they couldn't be hatched. Same thing happens to us. If we would have continued to use DDT the way we were using it, my children and my grandchildren would have been born with birth defects. It's not that DDT's bad, but we were using it in a bad way. So now, the Peregrine Falcon is truly the canary in the coal mine for us. Miners would take small birds into the coal mines in cages, and they'd look at the small birds, and every once in a while they'd see if a bird was dead, they'd get out of the mine quickly because there was poison gas. And the birds would die before the miners. Does that make sense, guys? Well, these are our canaries in the coal mine. They tell us how our environment is doing. If they're doing well, our environment's doing well. If they're having problems, our environment's having problems. What affects them affects us. And so because the Peregrine have saved our lives, I've dedicated my life to rescuing them. So this is why I do what I do. Falcon questions that I can answer for you.
How old is she?
She is just about the same age as the hawk. She's about a year and a half. In fact, she still has, you can see on her back right here, I know, you can see on her back, she's got some brown feathers, some really chocolatey brown feathers on her back. Okay, those will go black. Those are her juvenile feathers. So she's chocolate brown, and as an adult, she goes black on her back. Yes?
I'm noticing her cute little fur kind of on the bottom of her chin.
Yeah.
Is that a peregrine trait that?
No, actually, many of the birds of prey can. They, you know, what most people don't realize is they actually can control each and every feather, and so having that stick out is actually she's comfortable. If everything's tight, then they're nervous, and so that's a sign of comfort. So you're not bothering her. That's a Falcon question.
Is that why she doesn't need a hood, because she's nearsighted?
Right. It would be just a redundancy. She doesn't see well enough that lots of movement bothers her, so we don't worry about a hood. I can put a hood on her. There's no need.
Where is their territory primarily throughout the United States?
They, basically the Peregrine Falcon, well, we have 3 subspecies of Peregrine Falcons, the Anatum, the Tundra, and the Fields. The Anatum is right here in southern Utah, and what they love is very, very tall cliffs. So Zion's National Park, we've got more than 30 pairs of peregrines in Zion's alone. So anytime where there's big cliffs and a water source is good habitat for peregrine falcons.
You said 30 pairs, as in do they travel like monogamously with a partner, or are you saying just 30 pairs?
Basically, during the nesting season, they pair bond and they raise young. When the nesting season is over, they go their own thing, and then they come back next year to the same nesting site, repair bond, and raise young again. They will stay with their, as far as breeding is concerned, they will stay with the same mate their entire lives. And most birds of prey do. Yes?
What's the difference in weight between the peregrine and the other? And the hawk?
Between the peregrine and the Harris hawk, this little gal right here, let's do it in ounces. This little gal right here is about 26 to 28 ounces in weight, and that particular hawk is about 10 ounces heavier, about 38 ounces in weight. And so but that's a very large hawk, and though we actually have falcons bigger than this. The largest falcon in the world is the Gyr falcon, but this is considered a large falcon. And we do have falcons much smaller, and we have hawks bigger than the Harris hawk. We have hawks much smaller. And so size doesn't mean that hawk or falcon. Yes.
When they talk about on the TV, when they have peregrines in New York City.
Yes.
Is that a different species than this?
No,
one?
actually, let me tell you what we did. We have raised tens of thousands of peregrine falcons, returned them back to the wild. And we need the peregrine falcons in appropriate habitat. And so we need them here. We need them in Zions, we need them in Bryce, we need them in the gorge, we need them in native peregrine falcon habitat. That's where we need them. But what are we going to do with all the rest of them that we've raised? Because we've raised thousands and thousands of them. Well, peregrine falcons love really big cliffs, and they like to eat pigeons. Where do you find really big cliffs and pigeons?
New York City.
New York City, Salt Lake City, Los Angeles, Chicago, big cities. Now here's how it works. A bird of prey will return to where it learned to fly. It's hardwired to do that in their brain. And so basically a peregrine falcon that's nested, that was raised in Zions, will, when it's an adult, will return to Zions and look for a habitat in which to raise young. And if there's other birds already there in the territory, the other birds will drive them off. They have to find their own territory. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And so we can take these guys and we can put them in a hack box on top of buildings, big cities, and then open the box and let them come and go and let them get fed until they migrate out. And once they migrate out, when they're fully mature, they will return to the big city because that's where they learn to fly. And we can put up nesting boxes and encourage the peregrine falcons to come nest on the buildings. Now, the reason for that is pigeon control. But these eat like one pigeon every 3 to 4 days. That's not really good pigeon control. So that was the excuse that we used, but the truth is PR. I want you guys to love these animals as much as I do. And so if we can put a nesting box and put a video camera and we can broadcast it on the internet, or we can bring it down to the lobby of the building, and so people walking by can see mom and dad falcon raising their young. They say, oh, that's so cool, it's so beautiful, and these are such wonderful animals. It's a really good PR stunt. Does that make sense? And so that is the reason that we've released peregrines in cities, to educate people about how beautiful these animals are and their value. Any other falcon questions before I bring up? You're done, sweetie. We have Alan here with us. Alan's going to talk a little bit about the Shared Love program. Alan.
Great, Martin. Hey, I really appreciate a chance that we have today again to partner with Martin. Southwest Wildlife Foundation is it's remarkable, as he says, 7 years doing this, and to help sponsor Southwest Wildlife, and also to launch the Subaru Love event, which is going to start in November and run through the end of the year. It's just remarkable that, as we go forward, Subaru is going to donate $250 per car that we sell, and also Findlay Subaru will donate another $50 on top of that. And again, I'm just kind of standing here in amazement because this is as close as I've ever been to a beautiful creature like that.
Without your support, much of the work that we do we couldn't have accomplished. So we're so grateful.
Appreciate that.
For Subaru of America and Findlay Subaru for helping us.
Thank you.
Now, I like to make my own equipment. The hook that's on the Hawk, I make those. I like to make my own gloves. And the gloves that I make are this size, that I make for my Hawks and my Eagles. And, when I make them, they fit me like a glove. But my sweet wife, Susan, she gets very nervous when I'm handling eagles. I've been handling eagles for 50 years. And so when she sees an eagle sitting on my arm with a foot here and a foot here, it bothers her. And so a few years ago, my wife Susan went out and bought me a commercially made eagle falconry glove. Now the gloves that I make are made out of elk skin. And they're very soft and they're very pliable and they're very comfortable. This is cowhide. It's very, very stiff. It's uncomfortable, and you can see it fits me really, really well. Okay? But I've been married for 41 years. And I learned a long time ago that when your wife buys you a present, you use it. And so this is why I changed gloves, because the birds get used to a piece of equipment and they don't like change. And so once I got my eagle used to this glove, that's the glove that we use. Now, here's rule number 1, guys. Never stick your head in a box with a wild eagle. Don't do that. I have to do that, but don't you do this. Husky, turn around. Turn. A little bit bigger. This is a golden eagle. His name is Scout. He is 16 years old. He's a full-grown adult. A farmer up in Wyoming was threatening to shoot him, and I was called in by the federal government to rescue him before he got shot. So this is a full-grown wild eagle. And so let's talk about eagles. Let's start from the bottom and work our way up. Get comfy. Look at these feet. I think the hawk had massive feet. Look at these things. Yeah, get comfy. 600 pounds per square inch of crushing power on those feet. He can drive those talons through my glove and crush the bones in my hand. It's really good. He likes me. We do appreciate that. My eagle has over 7,000 feathers. Over 7,000. Now, there are many native people around the world that believe that if you say your prayers with an eagle feather, the eagle feather will carry your prayers to God. Well, I've got over 7,000 of them. I'm in really good shape. Now, all 7,000 feathers are very light. They only weigh about 2 pounds. So they're very lightweight. The bones of birds, are hollow. So his entire skeletal structure, again, only about 2 pounds in weight. Yet there's a portion of my eagle's body that represents half his total body weight, and that's the large chest muscles right here, the pectoral muscles. And those large muscles are the motors that he uses to drive that beautiful 6-foot wingspan that allows eagles to fly where hawks and falcons cannot. For eagles have been spotted at altitudes greater than 30,000 feet. And this eagle can comfortably soar in a 40-mile-an-hour wind, which would ground a hawk or a falcon. And of course, the eyesight of an eagle is legendary. Let me tell you truly how well an eagle can see. Here is an 8-pound creature. He weighs 8 pounds. This 8-pound creature has eyes larger than yours. Not only is his eyes larger, my eagle can see approximately 8 times further than you can. But you and I, we get a pair of binoculars, we can see 8 times further. Well, not only does he see 8 times further, he has 6 times the number of light-sensitive cells, the rods and cones at the back of the eye that we have. So everything he sees is 6 times clearer. This eagle can spot a jackrabbit 5 miles away. And he does. This eagle flies free. He goes thousands of feet in the sky. He flies with the wild eagles. And as he's out flying free, I look up at the sky, see 2 or 3 eagles soaring the ledges north of town. I look up and I say, well, I think that's my eagle. But it's really hard to tell. And you always have to wonder what they're talking about. To see my eagle flying with his friends, I can see my eagle looking over his buddies to say, watch this, I have a trained human. All I have to do is drift out over that guy's head, and he'll run up through the desert with a stick, hitting bushes, flushing out rabbits for me to catch. And I will. And if there are no rabbits to be found, it's time to go home. I can blow my whistle, he'll fly back, land on my glove for food. Or I have his toy. It's a leather sack. I tie food on the leather sack. It's called a lure. I can throw his toy out on the ground, and my eagle will go into a wonderful dive. Headlong, vertical, about 145 miles an hour, and he will kill the leather sack, which is convenient. One day my eagle got a little confused. Thousands of feet in the sky, no rabbits to be found. It was time to go home. So I blew my whistle, threw his toy out of the ground, and my eagle went into this wonderful dive. Headlong, vertical, 145 miles an hour. It was impressive. But it became apparent very quickly he wasn't coming down to kill his toy. He was coming to my arm. When I woke up, I was 6 feet back, laying face down in the dirt, with my eagle standing next to me, looking down at me to say, why are you laying there? I had a long talk with my eagle that day about how I cannot withstand the impact. Thank you for keeping it on the plastic, sir. Well, how I cannot withstand the impact of an 8-pound bird at 145 miles an hour, and I would appreciate if you never do that again. He dislocated my shoulder, and damaged my back and knees. But see, that accident has given me knowledge. See, I have a knowledge that none of you have. I have an absolute knowledge of exactly what is going through the mind of a jackrabbit just before an eagle kills it. I don't recommend it, but it's mine. Eagle questions that I can answer.
What happened to this one?
Like I said, this one, a farmer up in Wyoming was threatening to shoot him, and I was called in by the federal government to rescue him before he got shot.
Why
was the farmer wanting to shoot him? Old wives' tales die hard. There are still farmers that believe that eagles swoop down, carry off sheep, cows, and children. And so instead of arguing the point, sometimes it's best just to go rescue the animal. And so that's what I was asked to do. Now, here's the problem. They're migratory, just like the hawks and falcons. They're hardwired to return to where they learned to fly. And so if he goes back to Wyoming, he will be shot. So we cannot allow him to go back to Wyoming. And so most eagles in this situation, they go into a zoo and they stay in a cage for the rest of their lives. That's it. But because I am the first person in North America licensed to trap and train a wild eagle in falconry, this eagle gets to fly free and gets to hunt and gets to be an eagle, but he stays with me and he comes home with me every day, and so he doesn't go back to Wyoming. Now there is a drawback though, guys. This is a wild eagle. We do fly him through the courtship season. The courtship season starts about late January, and if he finds a pretty little lady eagle that's cuter than I am, he will fly away and never come back. Now he won't go to Wyoming because he'll be bonded to her. Does that make sense? And so I don't own him. He has the right to leave whenever he wants, and that's kind of what falconry is. We don't own these birds. We serve them well. And but he's been together with me for more than 14 years, which is just absolute proof that I'm adorable. So there you go. Other eagle questions that I can answer.
What's the average lifespan?
The average lifespan for an eagle like this in the wild is about 15 to 20 years in the wild. In captivity, we double that. If all goes well, this eagle will live between 40 and 50 years in captivity. Now the hawk and falcon, of course, are less. The hawks and falcons' average lifespan is 7 to 10 years. In the wild, in captivity, we double that. My previous Harris hawk passed away a couple of years ago. He was 29. And so handled well in captivity, we can double, even sometimes, yes. You're just fluffing out like mad, huh? Such a good one. So they have a much longer lifespan.
How often does he go eat? Every day? Or?
Yeah, basically he gets fed once a day, every day, and we try to get him out 4 or 5 days a week to go hunt.
Okay. Where do you take him around here?
Well, we live up in Cedar City.
Oh, okay.
And so we just go out on the deserts north of Cedar City where he gets to go fly.
Oh, okay.
So just out in the open where there's no buildings. And in fact, St. George, I hate to say it, guys, your town's been ruined. I used to come down here when St. George was 4,000 or 5,000 people, and there was great pheasant hunting and rabbit hunting and all that kind of stuff. And the Washington fields were nothing but farms, and so the places that the reason I would come down here with the animals hardly doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah. Blame it on the warm weather.
Yeah, that's it. Snowbirds. People coming to retire. Yeah. Yes, you're a good boy.
So would you call those his legs before his talons?
Yeah, this is called the tarsi.
Tarsi.
Yes, which is the foreleg right here.
Okay.
And one of the ways you tell a bald eagle from a golden eagle is a bald eagle, the tarsi is bare, and the golden eagle is what we call a booted eagle. It has feathers down to the top of the back. And so even though a bald eagle and a golden eagle are very similar in color as babies, as juveniles, as adults they look very different, but as juveniles they look very similar. But you look at the leg, and if you see the bare leg, it's a golden eagle. If you see the bare leg, it's a bald. If you see feathers, it's a golden.
Are they similar in size to the bald eagle?
The bald eagles are slightly larger, but not a whole lot. And so you can have, a bald eagle and a golden eagle virtually be identical in size. In fact, I just released a golden eagle back to the wild a couple of weeks ago, and it was slightly larger than the bald eagle that I have in right now. But generally speaking, the bald eagles are a little larger.
Are the eagles protected at all? I know the bald eagle obviously is, but is the golden eagle going to have any kind of protection like that farmer was saying he's going to shoot it? I thought you couldn't shoot eagles.
Basically, all birds, all migratory wildlife are federally protected. I mean, virtually everything with the exception of like the English house sparrow, which is not native, the Asiatic dove, which is not native, the starling, which is not native, and the pigeon, which is not native. But everybody else has some form of protection. The birds of prey are protected under the Federal Migratory Bird Treaty Act, and so these guys are very protected. Now, the bald eagle and the golden eagle are also protected under the Federal Eagle Act, which is actually protection above and beyond the Endangered Species Act. So the bald eagle and the golden eagle are the two most protected animals in North America. But here's the issue, guys. If you are a farmer and you complain loud enough, you can get a permit to shoot virtually anything. And so that's pretty much the way it works. And so you can get a permit to shoot wolves, you can get a permit to shoot eagles, you can get a permit to shoot almost anything. But the farmer has to complain to the Department of Agriculture, because the Department of Agriculture works with the farmers. And the Department of Agriculture, before they give them a permit to shoot an eagle, they have to notify the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, which protects wildlife. And then the Fish and Wildlife Service calls me on the phone and says, we've got an eagle that a farmer's going to get a permit to shoot. Can you get up to Wyoming to rescue before that happens? So that's kind of how that happens. Any last eagle questions before we call it a day?
So going and capturing a healthy eagle is a lot different than one that's been injured. How do you capture a healthy eagle?
How do I trap a wild eagle? The truth of the matter is I'm not going to tell you.
Okay.
Because I'm one of very few people in North America that can actually do this. And so we don't want people going out and attempting to do it illegally. And so, but I will tell you this much. The trap I used gently ensnares the eagle's feet. It took me a week to catch him. We had to put down, because he ate a lot of roadkill, we had to put down a bunch of rabbit carcasses to bring them in, to get them to feed. And then, like I said, trap his feet. Now, we would never stake the trap to the ground, because if they pulled against it, they would injure their legs, and this is far too priceless an animal to injure. And so we put a weight on the trap so they can drag it around but cannot fly. The drag weight I used for this eagle is 2 pounds. With 2 pound drag weight, this eagle could not get off the ground. Now, the idea of an eagle swooping down, carry off sheep, cows, and children, the average weight of a newborn lamb is 11 pounds. If he can't carry 2, he's not going to carry 11. In fact, the truth of the matter is, if there is a mother who's out on the desert with a baby that weighs less than 2.5 pounds, she should be arrested. So are they a threat to us or to livestock? No. An eagle can certainly kill a newborn lamb, it could, but they're primarily a scavenger. They would much prefer to eat something dead than alive. Does that make sense? And so they're actually highly beneficial. But like I said, sometimes I live across the street from what was many years ago a sheep farm, and the farmer that ran his livestock. When I first got my first eagle more than 30 years ago, the farmer was absolutely convinced that when he was a child, an eagle swooped down and carried off his 4-H project, which was a 150-pound sheep. And he swears he saw the eagle fly off with the sheep. And that they can do that, and that he knows for a fact that my eagle is just faking it, and that one day my eagle's going to fly off with me. And there's no way to convince him otherwise. And so, like I said, sometimes it's not worth arguing, just rescue the animal.
I have a story about when I was younger. I had a sports car, and I was coming around through the mountains, and I was going, good pace, and come around this this turn, and in the middle of the road was a golden eagle and a dead rabbit. And the only thing I saw was that eagle wingspan across my windshield as it went over me.
Yep.
And it was a golden eagle.
Well, the number one injury to eagles here in Utah is being hit by cars.
Yeah.
Because they eat a lot of roadkill, and people go driving down the highway 70, 80 miles an hour, and they see a big bird off ahead of them on the highway, and they say, oh, it'll move, and it can't.
Yeah.
They're very big, and they're very slow to get off the ground. And so you're actually quite fortunate you didn't have an eagle through the windshield.
Yes.
Because that's what generally happens.
I slammed on the brakes.
Yeah. Eagle goes through the windshield, they get a broken car, I get a broken eagle.
Yeah.
But that's why I've been rescuing them my whole life. Is because somebody's got to take care of these critters. You have a question?
Yeah, I'm noticing the way he's holding his mouth. Sometimes he'll close it. Sometimes he'll just have it open.
It's a little warm in here.
Okay.
He's panting. They pant like a dog does. They don't have perspiration glands like we do. And so he's coaxing. Basically what he's saying is, why are we here? This is the hunting season. We need to go chase some rabbits. So he's kind of coaxing, and it's a little bit warm for him. And you do have to watch them very carefully because eagles will overheat. And when it gets much above 70, I have to watch them carefully. And we won't even bring him out and do programs if it's above 80 and we're not in an air-conditioned building. Because they overheat so quickly.
Yeah.
Any last questions, guys, before we call it a day?
It's illegal to have an eagle feather, isn't it?
It's illegal to have any feather from any bird of prey.
No, any bird.
Any bird of prey at all. But especially, basically, if you have a hawk feather in your hat, you're breaking the law. If you have an eagle feather in your hat, you're going to get arrested.
Why is that?
Well, because people would go out and shoot eagles and cut their legs off and hang them on the rear view mirrors and shoot eagles and pluck feathers to put them in their hats and for decorations. And so to protect eagles from being shot, they made it illegal to have any parts of these. And that's for all birds of prey, not just eagles. In fact, one of the red-tailed hawks that I have in right now that came into the rescue center, it's an adult red-tailed hawk. It's a beautiful little bird. I don't know what happened to it, but somehow somebody got a hold of that red-tailed hawk and ripped out all but 2 of its tail feathers.
Oh.
So finding a feather on the ground when you're hiking or whatever
is illegal.
Illegal.
Yes, it's illegal to pick it up. And so here's this poor red-tailed hawk that somebody just, if you could imagine, these feathers go into a quill that's about that far in, and it's very, very tight. It's literally taking a pair of pliers and pulling your fingernails out. So here someone had an injured red-tailed hawk. What the injuries were, because it was probably just, clipped by a car and wasn't injured badly, because I couldn't find any other injuries. But here's this poor hawk laying on the ground. They walk up, they grab it, they pin it down with their knee, and they rip tail feathers out of this poor animal. And so that red-tailed hawk will be at our rescue center for probably pretty much a year until it grows all of its new feathers.
That was my next question, if they could grow their feathers back.
Yes.
Because
So
all
that-
birds molt, right? They
That's what
all
it
they all
molts.
lose their feathers.
They lose their major flight feathers and grow new ones every year. So when it molts,
What do you do with them?
what I do with them, with the eagles, when I get a big box full of feathers, we ship them off to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's Feather Lab, and then the feathers are distributed to the Native Americans for ceremonial purposes, and that includes any eagles that come into the rescue center that don't survive, because when they come to me, they're almost dead in most cases, and so if one doesn't make it, then we freeze it and ship it to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's Feather Lab for the Native Americans to have the parts.
So how many birds do you have?
Again, that changes almost daily. Right now, in rehab, I have 2 red-tailed hawks and a bald eagle. I just released a golden eagle about a week or so ago. And so, by the time I get home, I might get called out and have to pick up more. Because the number of, injured animals come in when they're healthy, they go out.
And you take in anything. I've seen deer at your place.
Yes, yeah, we take in native Utah wildlife. Now, we can't do deer anymore.
Oh, really?
Yeah, here's the problem. Every time I have to renew my permits, the Fish and Game basically lists more and more things they won't let us care for. I was the last person in Utah that could take care of deer, but once I had to renew my permit, then I have to fall under the current regulations, and so nobody in the state can take care of deer anymore, which is just absolutely ridiculous. So the list keeps getting longer I renew my permits about every 5 years. So every 5 years, I have to go through and go, what are they going to prohibit me from caring for next? Yes, I know.
Both of our founders have birthdays in December, and both of our founders have only one thing on their birthday wish list, and of course, it's for the critters. They would like a brand new Subaru Forester from Findlay Subaru of St. George. The Foundation vehicle is absolutely essential to safely transport our wildlife ambassadors to presentations throughout the Southwest, as well as to rescue sick and injured wildlife. If you would like to contribute in honor of Susan and Martin's birthdays, please visit www.gowildlife.org/bday. Thanks, everyone.